We are doing exercise 5G, and in this video I'll be answering question 3b, which says, find the inverse function of each of the following, state the domain and range of the inverse of f. And as you can see here, we've been given our f, here is our domain, here is our codomain, and we're told that f of x equals x minus 2 squared plus 3. Now this question is asking two things of us. We need to find the inverse function, and we need to find its domain and range. And as you can see here, I've broken this question up into two steps. First step, find the inverse function. Second step, find the domain and range. So let's begin with our first step, finding the inverse function. And as you can see here, I've written down the steps we need to follow in order to find the inverse function. So let's begin. The first step is let y equals f of x. So here's f of x equals this. So I can go y equals x minus 2 squared plus 3. I've done the first step. Next step, switch x's with y's. So now I'm going to switch my x's and y's. So I'll get an x here equals y minus 2 squared plus 3. I've done that step. Next, rearrange to make y the subject. So at the moment, x is my subject. So let's do some rearranging. So I'm going to minus 3 from both sides. I'm going to get x minus 3 equals y minus 2 squared. To get rid of this square, I'm going to square root both sides. So I'm going to end up with plus or minus the square root of x minus 3 equals y minus 2. Now I'm going to plus 2 to both sides, so I'm going to get 2 plus or minus the square root of x minus 3 equals y. So as you can see now, y is my subject, so I've done the third step. The final step is to equate the new expression to the inverse of f, and let me do this step in red because it's the last step. It's going to be f, the inverse of f, of x equals 2 plus or minus the square root of x minus 3. Now, at the moment, this isn't correct because I have both a plus and a minus. If I was to draw this on this right here, I know that it is a square root graph, and this minus 3 is telling me it shifted 3 in the positive x direction, and this 2 is telling me it shifted up in the positive y direction. So it will be here, and then it's going to have a plus and a minus. So this is my inverse at the moment. Now, what is wrong with this? Well, if we were to do a vertical line test, as you can see, it wouldn't pass it because I have two intersection points. And that tells me that this is not a function. And we're trying to find the inverse function, so something obviously has gone wrong. And what's gone wrong is we haven't considered what we are finding the inverse of. As you can see here, here is our inverse function, but the domain is restricted. So why have they restricted the domain, and why is that so important? Well, let me rub this line out, and let's draw f now. So it's x minus 2 squared plus 3. So it's going to be a parabola. And this minus 2 is going to mean it shifted 2 in the positive x direction. And this 3 is going to mean it shifted 3 in the positive y direction. So it will begin here, and it will look like this. Now, if we were to just look at this at the moment without considering our domain, what's wrong with this? Well, this doesn't pass the horizontal line test, which means it's not one-to-one. And that's when alarm bells should start ringing in your head, because we know this very important rule down here. An inverse function exists if and only if f is a one-to-one function. F has to be a one-to-one function. So at the moment, as you can see, this is our f. It isn't a one-to-one function. So something is a bit of a miss. And that's because we haven't taken into account the fact that our domain is restricted between 2 to infinity. So here is 2, and that's infinity that way. So that means that this part of the graph isn't going to exist. Now you can see, having now restricted our domain, our f will pass our horizontal line test. It will only intersect it once, which means it is 1 to 1. So it's this that we're finding the inverse of. This is what we're finding the inverse of. And we know how to find the inverse. It's reflecting across y equals x. So we're reflecting across y equals x. And if we were to do that, hopefully you can see that I'm only going to end up with this arm of the inverse function, only this arm. And that's going to mean that it's going to be only positive. It's not going to be plus or minus, it's just going to be the plus, because this corresponds to the plus side. So this right now will be your final answer for the inverse function. And this is what the graph is going to look like. Now, the question didn't ask us to draw a graph, but I've just done it for educational purposes. Now we need to find what my domain and range is, and we could actually use our graph. We could say, well, my domain of my inverse will be 3 to infinity. 3 to infinity. And my range of the inverse will be 2 to infinity. 2 to infinity. And that makes perfect sense when we consider what the domain of my function will be. So the domain of f will be 2 to infinity, and we're actually told that here. So 2 to infinity. And my range will be 3 to infinity. And as you can see, my domain of f is the same as the inverse of the range, and my range of f is the same as the inverse of my domain. So that was quite a long question, and I've gone through it a bit slower than usual, just so you can get a fuller picture of what's going on. But hopefully this made sense to you, and if you're having any difficulties at all, come speak to me about it.